Hello, this is the Gemsbach, and today's topic is Transistor, a game developed by Supergiant Games and originally released in 2014. It would be boring for me to spend this video saying that Supergiant Games' Transistor is a gorgeous-looking, wonderfully designed, mechanically fun, and brilliantly soundtracked title, even though all of that is perfectly true. It would be slightly less boring for me to use this video to defend Transistor's much maligned brevity in the same spirit as I have defended other cheap, brief indie campaigns, even though I would be willing to defend it on that point. But the least boring thing for me to do here, I feel, is to discuss the one area of the game that I am inclined to criticize: Transistor's presentation of its plot.
What happened?
Supergiant Games has an attraction to endings, and not just to the endings of games, as you might expect from the shortness of their titles, but to the ending of worlds. Each of their wildly successful indie RPGs, Bastion and Transistor, has presented a vividly imagined world right around the moment of its ultimate demise. And I've loved this aesthetic decision in both cases. But in both cases, the series of events leading up to the end of the world, and so leading up to the start of the game, is not easily discerned, which, in the often lore-heavy RPG genre, is really saying something. The nature of this video is such that it requires spoiling major plot details of Transistor, so you should only continue watching after this point if you do not mind spoilers or have already played the game. Yes, the one complaint that I have about Transistor pertains to the game's story. It is a complaint that I also had about Bastion, though to a much lesser extent, and it is a complaint that I feel bad making, because this game does with its narrative so much more and so much better than many other titles. But here it is. The plot details of Transistor either do not fit together or are not sufficiently communicated to the player. At moments when there are potential gaps and complications, Transistor opts for mystery over clarity.
The transistor. I have no idea what's inside it, really.
Mysteries are welcome, but not if they're both abundant and never resolved. Even ambiguities are welcome, provided they do not become a crutch to replace storytelling or seem like careless omissions. And this isn't a matter of being unacquainted with the game's world building. I've read every word in the terminals, function biographies, and limiter logs 3 times over, having played the game all the way through twice in New Game and once in New Game Plus.
They want you back, I bet.
Here is a brief account of the story of Transistor as I understand it. Independently, several citizens of Cloudbank grew tired of living in the constant flux of the simulated city. Following the initiative of Grant Kendrell, they teamed up, took on the name Camerata, and drafted the mission statement: when everything changes, nothing changes. One of their members, Royce Brackett, while toying with the math of the world in the northwestern part of Cloudbank, stumbled upon the underlying process that creates Cloudbank, as well as the tool, the eponymous Transistor, that grants control of that process. The Camerata plotted to use the Transistor and process to change the city to better reflect their vision. They began kidnapping influential and useful members of the Cloudbank community to broaden their control. In attempting to kidnap protagonist Red, a famous singer in Cloudbank, they were foiled by the intervention of her significant other. At that point, the Camerata lose the Transistor to Red, and thus they lose control over the process in the ensuing hours. The process begins running amok, and the game begins. Red elects to seek answers and vengeance by tracking down the 4 key members of the Camerata. Throughout her journey, she is constantly besieged by monstrous process entities, and to defeat them, she must use the Transistor's dual abilities of allowing combat maneuvers to be planned out in advance, and wielding traces of people absorbed by the Transistor as attacks. She finds and kills one of the 4, Socialite and Red's former friend Sybil Rise, at a concert venue. She finds 2 more of them, the leader Grant Kendrell and the propagandist Asher Kendrell, already dead together at the top of an administration building, having killed themselves less than an hour prior. By this point, nearly the entire city has been reduced to a white, cubic wasteland by the process, and nearly all inhabitants still within Cloudbank are dead. Red locates the 4th and final target, the technological and mathematical mastermind behind the Camerata's use of the Transistor, Royce Brackett, in an unrecognizably blank version of one of the city's popular vacation spots. Royce entreats her to use the Transistor with a gigantic device called the Cradle in order to halt the process's destruction of the world. It succeeds, but also pulls Red and Royce into the Transistor, where they fight each other to be the only one to escape, and Red emerges victorious. She toys with the idea of rebuilding the city using the Transistor for a moment, then decides instead to kill herself with the Transistor in order to rejoin her significant other. The end. Now, you might think, in a video of this nature, that I'm going to spend a long time criticizing the controversial ending of the game, which sees Red committing suicide to join her beloved inside the transistor. But in actuality, I'm not settled on my opinion of it. On the one hand, it's true that it callously makes light of suicide by depicting it as a happy ending for Red. But on the other hand, in the universe of the game, it's not clear that Red's actions at the end even count as suicide in the conventional sense. After all, not only has her experience with the transistor throughout the game taught her that there is practically a 100% chance that instead of dying, her consciousness will be transferred into the device, but she has also just spent a short span of time inside of the transistor already while fighting Royce. So she knows what will happen if she goes through with it and what it will be like. Those kinds of guarantees exist for her in Cloudbank, although they do not exist for humans in reality. Still, none of that changes the fact that it seems distasteful to make suicide such a pleasant ending, as those of us who are playing the game tend to be human beings living in reality, particularly when Red's death makes it so that a full 50% of the game's 6 key characters choose to commit suicide and then go through with that choice. At any rate, even setting that detail aside, I think you'll find that I have plenty to criticize. Alright, so in broad strokes, the story seems okay. But if you ask any questions about any part of it, it just starts falling apart. So, the Camerata were kidnapping people to broaden their control.
They were hunting people. Don't know for what.
Are the kidnapped people brainwashed? Are they replaced with process puppets? Are they subsumed into the transistor and thus captured, like Pokémon, to be wielded later? Were they just hoping to win hearts and minds legitimately after some underhanded beginnings?
All we needed was your point of view.
We get a hint at answering one of these questions in some visuals near the game's end, but nothing substantial. Moreover, a lot is said about the apocalypse not being the Camerata's goal.
This isn't what we had in mind.
But it's never clear what the Camerata actually wanted for Cloudbank in the first place.
Give the people what they didn't know they wanted. That's all we ever wanted.
More stability? Less superficiality? Would stopping the seasons changing really alter everyone's minds in a noticeable and important way? What do the Camerata want to accomplish?
When everything changes, nothing changes. That's the Camerata's creed, our mission. We love our city the way it is. We didn't want to see it fade because someone out there didn't like the color of the sky.
Royce Brackett talks about it as though he originally joined the Camerata out of boredom, really undercutting the intrigue of the Enterprise.
Even the seasons, they're just whim. Why, I guess I grew weary of it.
And as if that wasn't enough to wonder about, why on earth would the Camerata even need to control influential people to accomplish their goal? Whatever that goal is, when they already had the transistor.
Thought they could change the world with this thing.
According to the game, that's all they need to bring about their vision.
It's good for more than just bridges, of course. Why, it can make just about anything happen.
But instead of using their magic wand to immediately seize control of the city and reshape it, they slink around, converting or murdering journalists, athletes, and entertainers. In the function biographies, there are a lot of vague references to government cover-ups and forcibly quieted dissenters. But there is basically no information about Cloudbank's government or administration available anywhere in the game.
Central admin sure keeps it tidy.
The player never learns whether the administration really was overly controlling. The player never learns if the administration or the city's artists knew about the process. The player never even learns the most basic description of Cloudbank's origin, governance, purpose, or people. Also, why is the process attacking the city? Why is the process attacking Red? The person who wields the transistor controls the process.
The process is just doing a job. Doing its job. Though I much preferred it when the process did mine.
But there are only 3 minor instances in the entire campaign where that becomes arguably relevant. When the player uses the help function to summon a dog, when Red surfs on a cloud of process drones, and when Red rebuilds a section of whited out bridge at the end of the game. Other than that, the process constantly attacks its purported master with increasing aggression, and just mindlessly tears down the facades making up the city. There's an undercurrent in the limiter logs of the process creatures documenting and eventually mimicking human beings. But if that means the process has some overriding will of its own, that fact is not mentioned at any point. Even details that should be obvious are sometimes obfuscated. For instance, why does the game begin with the narrator still having the transistor sticking out of his stabbed body, when Red, the narrator, the transistor, and her gown are so far from the empty set?
We're on the edge of town, 100 blocks away.
that they have to drive a motorcycle on a highway to return there. According to the narrative, the attack that killed the narrator happened at the empty set, so we're left with two equally bizarre possibilities. Either the narrator was not instantly killed by the transistor, betraying the logic of the transistor everywhere else in the story, and he traveled with a giant sword-like weapon protruding from his torso halfway across the city, or else Red dragged his dead body, still with a giant weapon sticking out of it, which she struggles to carry on its own without dragging it around, that entire distance before pulling the weapon out.
Could use your help.
And this isn't some strange nitpick. Don't forget, the apocalyptic events that take place in the story,
All of Cloudbank's gonna wind up like this.
most of the plot elements of the entire game happen specifically because the Camerata lose the transistor.
Once they lost the transistor, they lost control of the process.
So how exactly did they lose it? Upon killing the wrong person, did they all immediately flee in the opposite direction at top speed, leaving the incredibly powerful linchpin of their entire operation behind?
Our old friend Grant, I let him borrow it. And anyway, here we are.
Apparently so. And here's a minor issue. What is the relationship between Grant Kendrell and Asher Kendrell? Asher's biography alludes to him helping to found the Camerata after meeting an influential administrator, presumably Grant, and it is implied in the biographies and Asher's narration that Asher and Grant are romantic partners.
Grant, he couldn't wait any longer. Why he would leave me?
They even have the same last name, but Grant is 55 years old, and Asher is 28. Yes, Grant is nearly twice as old as Asher. So because the game opts to be so ambiguous and unclear about their partnership, the huge 27-year age difference suddenly makes it seem like there may be some other explanation. That the name is some kind of weird symbolic Camerata thing, or that they're actually estranged cousins, or that Grant has adopted Asher, or even that they somehow coincidentally just happen to have the same surname. Who knows, maybe Kendrell is like the Smith of Cloudbank. And here's yet another baffling element. The narrator twice refers to the Camerata as having somehow stolen Red's voice.
They took your voice. I couldn't stop them.
In what sense could this possibly be true? Stealing a quality of a person, such as their voice, rather than stealing their life entirely, is not an ability attributed to the transistor anywhere else in the game. And the Camerata's attack was a failure anyway, with the narrator stopping the weapon from ever making any contact with Red. Not to mention the fact that Red clearly still has her voice, as she spends a huge proportion of the game audibly humming, and can be induced to hum at any time by pressing the tab key. In theory, one could hope that these mentions of Red's voice being taken from her are intended as metaphorical. But there's at least one point in the game where Red converses with the narrator by typing into the comment field of a terminal, as though she literally cannot speak.
We'll figure it out when we get there.
And her function biography says she was partially transferred into the transistor somehow. So instead of a metaphor, this is left feeling like a holdover from an early draft of the story that was never entirely removed. Whenever one of these questions seems close to having an answer, a character dismisses the possibility with something vague and seemingly deep. I say seemingly because it's the sort of depth that one aims to create when writing a forum roleplay as a preteen. If the sentiment is sad and the phrasing is pretty, it sounds deep, even if the content is shallow or confusing. The biggest culprits here are Royce Brackett, always.
No walls in there, mind you. It's just they're on their own.
And the narrator during his periods of blurred consciousness near the spine.
You're still there, and I'm still here. You're still there, and I'm still here.
So, unfortunately, all of the inscrutable details make an interpretation of what is otherwise a very interesting set of ideas, narrative elements, and world details needlessly difficult.
I start talking funny, just ignore me, okay?
There is something here regarding metafiction, concerning characters whose entire existence is in a program, Cloudbank, the process, transistor, functions, and the endless string of other computing terms and labels, but the ambiguities make a full interpretation of these details into an exercise in guesswork and speculation. And there is something here regarding relationships, concerning either loss or arduous long-distance separation.
What I said back there about wanting to see you again.
face to face. I want you to know. I meant it.
But one could interpret that part of the tale while completely setting aside almost the entire plot of the game. Instead, one is left with a reading as vague as the details of Transistor's plot. It's about some kind of tension between creativity and incompatibilist determinism, between diversity and conformity, between color and sterility, between texture and smoothness, and/or between distraction and stability. Perhaps the theme is that one must balance these dichotomies. Perhaps the theme is that the former always trumps the latter. I'm inclined to think, because of a few happenings toward the end of the game, and because of the separated planning and execution in the battle mechanic, that the game's thematic stress is on creativity and actualization. But it's just tough to say. Don't get me wrong here, this is not just a long diatribe against ambiguity and symbolism. I am a great admirer of the symbol-reliant art of filmmakers like Federico Fellini, David Lynch, Ingmar Bergman, and Andrei Tarkovsky, and I am confident that games are capable of reaching a similar level of artistic excellence and expression. But Transistor, while it is certainly art, and is much closer to artistic excellence than the vast majority of other games, still pales in comparison to the works of those filmmakers. The details of Transistor make a sustained and specific effort to establish the world and the plot. They allude to aspects of the world and story which are contradicted by other elements, such as the idea that Red's voice has been stolen, or seemingly forgotten by the creators, such as establishing how the events of the night before the game's beginning could have possibly resulted in the Camerata losing the Transistor. They make a great effort to say what the Camerata's goal is not, then stop well short of providing enough information to confidently infer what the Camerata's goal is. The game's attempt at communication is not subjugated to a greater artistic project. It is a good faith effort at communication, full of straightforward, non-symbolic details that is merely incomplete and inconsistent, and therefore at least partially unsuccessful. To put it another way, I do not necessarily need Transistor to be more comprehensible. I try to judge each work of art on its own terms. It is the game itself which has pretensions of comprehensibility. I am only asking that it be more cohesive. So, how could this state of affairs have been averted? Supergiant Games could have allowed the third tier of biography unlocks to contain more substantive plot details and answers. Much of the meandering dialogue of Royce could have been replaced with, still meandering, clear exposition of the Camerata's true motivations, obstacles, and end goals. And the early game terminals could have been populated with full articles that give a clear picture of the city's existing administration and atmosphere, so that we get some concrete sense of why the Camerata would want to do whatever unchanging thing it is that they want to do.
Guess I was wrong about them. The Camerata wanted things to change. For good. But not like this.
But ultimately, there's one very big, overriding gameplay problem that results from having the game's narrative as it is now. The problem is this. The narrative issues devalue the final boss fight. It does not feel as though the whole game has built up to it. As far as the player knows, the only reason for them to dislike Royce Brackett, besides his apparent incompetence in lending the Transistor to Grant, who promptly loses it, is that Royce selfishly attacks Red so that he can escape at the end.
Unfortunately, the only way back that I'm aware of is, well, unpleasant.
Like a mini-boss in a classic side-scroller, one's only reason for fighting the enemy is that it physically attacked you a few seconds ago. It is ultimately unclear if the Camerata's goal was noble or terrible, and not because of moral ambiguity.
What we were doing was wrong, in the traditional sense.
Just because we have no idea what that goal might be. A final boss fight in an RPG should be the emotional climax of the playthrough as well as the final test of the player's abilities. Transistor's final fight may deliver on the latter, but does not deliver on the former. So that final fight is a poignant synecdoche for the whole Transistor experience. A fun, tight, beautiful session with great music, yet lacking in needed details on closer inspection. For this reason, and some of my own feature and atmosphere preferences, I find Bastion to be the studio's stronger contender overall. Still, as I said earlier, I've played Transistor 3 times now, and I have enjoyed it every time. So, with all of my legitimate criticism, and all of my pedantic whining out of the way,
I am calling for a truce.
with a track record this strong, you can bet I'll still be aiming to play Supergiant Games' other titles in the future.